Hello, Kaitlyn.
Hi.
Hi. I'm very happy that you are here, that you're my guest in the Macht Zentrale. A few months ago, I had the chance to interview you for a quite interesting panel, and there I decided to also invite you for my podcast.
Thank you. What an honor.
So, Kaitlyn, you are impact architect at Accenture Song here in Vienna. And you look back on an international career, more or less in the digital agency business, I would call it. Mm-hmm. So let's maybe take a look back together. If you look back, for example, the last 10 years, what happened there in your life? What maybe were the biggest highlights, also maybe your biggest downlights, or maybe also the biggest milestones in that time?
So I've spent the past 18 years, or now it's almost becoming 19. Oh God, how time is flying. Years in basically the agency, so communication agency industry. And all of that wasn't in Austria, actually, and that's also the reason why we're speaking in English today. Thank you so much, Vera.
That's fine. You said that you sound much smarter in English. I'm not so sure about me, but I give my best.
I also try my best to fulfill that promise. So the past almost 20 years was in the communication branch in Korea, also in the US, a little bit in India, a little bit in Brazil, and then for the past 10 years in actually Austria. Mm-hmm. So if you say the past 10 years, that was actually sort of the span of my entire Austrian life, per se, on a personal level. And I think the highlight of my entire career could be probably the time when I was given my first management position in an agency that I worked for before. Because that was, so I'd been promoted relatively very early, so in the beginning of my 30s to managing director in our agency back then for Austria and Switzerland. And it was, before that I was just, doing my projects and leading projects and doing good jobs there, and that's why I got promoted, right? And it was a really exciting time because then I was able to sort of experiment with the ideas that I had in terms of also setting up the team, how do I want to really set it up. I've been always very focused on diversity and inclusion, and that's why I also tried as much as possible to really, intentionally set a diverse team, as diverse as possible on every single levels, not just about the gender equality and gender diversity. And that also actually paid off at the end. So those years were really, really fun because we had a lot of, fun together as a diverse team. We learned also a lot.
I can imagine.
Yeah, and we also made a lot of mistakes, but we learned very, very much in terms of how do diverse teams work and how do we make it work as best as possible. But also the most rewarding part, I think, of that was that we were able to win also a lot of awards and do really great projects in that time frame. And I don't think those two things are unrelated, right? So there was a point in time in that period where we were literally winning one award every week.
Cool.
And where the team was feeling almost like, oh God, like, doesn't it feel like it's maybe a bit too much? Do we maybe should stop posting about these things on social media because it feels a bit too much like bragging. So that was a really exciting time. But what I can also say is that was also the downlight of my career actually as well, because right after that period I actually had an intense burnout and had to take time off for almost a year. And I think it's because, I was thrown basically into a role of managing a lot of people and having to make a lot of decisions on a management level for the entire company of our branch for the first time without really knowing the specifics of, I don't know, labor law, taxes and all of that. And still, I was at the end the person who was supposed to make the decisions. Right? Yeah. And so that really put a lot of pressure on me, I think, and was very, very stressful. So I think that's why, and then comes the whole classic problem of, the imposter syndrome, where you don't feel like, as a woman, you don't feel like you're doing enough. You don't feel like you're really there. You feel like you have to give more. You have to be more perfect. And so I put a lot of time and stress and energy into work at that time. And that actually eventually led to a burnout. So
about how many years do you talk when you tell us this story? How many years did you just work like that, very intensively?
Those years were 3 years.
3
actually.
years, okay, wow. Yeah. So when you say those were actually also, I mean, highlights, but also most challenging years, what would you say? What were the most important takeaways of that time for you personally?
For me personally, so from a management perspective, from office running perspective, of course, I learned that diversity still is super important, right? I saw firsthand the benefits of it. But for me personally, what also then became super important for me afterwards is literally, work-life balance. Trying to, acknowledge the importance of your life and yourself and your health, and also your mental health, and how important it is to really take care, first of all, by yourself, for yourself, so that you can continue actually doing the things that you love. Because otherwise, and that's why I also say always to my team as well, health is the utmost priority. You should prioritize that over everything else, because if you lose that, then all of a sudden you can't keep doing the things that you like and you love. And
so
that's
true.
That's really sad.
So true. So how do you manage that today? How do you find this very important balance?
Well, I also have to say that I'm not perfect yet, right? I don't think anyone is perfect, but I have tried a lot to really allocate time for my family, because in the meantime, I've also, started a family, and I have beautiful children, and I really try to take time off for them. And also, luckily, I work right now in a company where it's very much encouraged to have, flexible work hours, and also, do part-time when it's needed, etc. And so I really try to take advantage of those benefits, and also encourage everyone around me in the team also to do the same, because if you're the only one who's doing it in the company, it doesn't work. Everybody has to be also understanding and be supportive of each other, and that's actually, I think, the new teamwork that's required in this new flexible new work era.
What would you say, what is more important, to have this self-discipline to keep the balance, or to have a system that makes it possible?
System.
The system.
Definitely the system, because even if you have the self-discipline, well, as far as I know myself, I try to have that self-discipline, it doesn't work.
Yeah, okay.
And I keep also, right now I'm doing full-time again, but up until actually last month, I was doing part-time for a few months before the small baby went to kindergarten. And from that experience, I also learned a lot about myself and how difficult it is to self-discipline, even especially when I'm doing part-time, and forcing myself not to work actually more than is required, right? And I think a lot of that comes from, again, this whole imposter syndrome, and also feeling like that feeling of guilt, where you feel like you're not doing enough for the team because you're not there the whole time, and therefore you have to maybe make up for it by working a bit more hours. You think, I'll do that more, and that all ends up being summed up to, a lot more hours than what's required of you. And so through that experience, I also learned that just expecting people to have self-discipline and exercise that so rigorously so that they're able to keep doing that. Yes, there are people who do it, mega respect for them, but for most of the people, that's not so easy. And that's why it's super important to have the system and the environment and the culture within companies and also within the society that really enables that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally agree. I want to talk about the system a little bit later, but you said something very interesting now for me, and I want to go into that a bit deeper. You said that there is the feeling of guilt. You said, for example, when you're not working full time, then you have this feeling that you leave your team or whatever. Do you experience the same feeling the other way around when you're working, that you're, for example, not with your kids, with your husband?
Definitely. And
So
I
it's
think it's a lose-lose game, right? You feel guilt everywhere. And I think that's the problem.
Yeah, that's a big problem.
Exactly. And I think, therefore, on the one hand, I've realized for myself personally that I am going to feel this guilt all the time, right? Then I think it's really important just to acknowledge firsthand that, yes, this guilt is there and that's normal to feel. Because a lot of people, I think, also sort of put themselves under pressure for even feeling that guilt and feeling like, why do I feel this guilt? I shouldn't be feeling this guilt. No, it's completely normal to feel that guilt both ways, and that just won't go away, I think. It's always going to be there, but I think the trick is to think about how can I minimize it as much as possible, and how do I do that with the help of others and not just by myself. And that goes back again to this whole question of system and surroundings and environment. Yeah, and not just yourself.
Yeah, totally agree with that. So the system, you work at Accenture Song in Austria, and you mentioned in this panel discussion that we had together that they have a very flexible system. And like everyone working there can choose, let's say, monthly, or maybe a bit more upfront, but still very flexible, how much everyone wants to work. Maybe you want to tell us something about that, because I think this is very innovative and very, special, I would say.
I agree. I also, every time I talk about it on stages or in panel discussions, everybody is always very, very surprised to hear about it. At Accenture, there's a lot of different programs and different initiatives that really encourage and help flexible work. And the one that you mentioned is something that's central to it here in our region. It's called My Contract. And this basically means that every employee, it's a website where you can go in. It's an intranet website. You go in and you can simulate how much your salary will increase or decrease if you sort of change the amount of hours that you wanted to work, right, instead of full-time 40 hours per week. Because that's usually the first thing that comes to your mind that you're curious about if you're thinking about doing part-time even for a little while. But the core and the cool part about this website or tool is not just that. Instead, it's actually that if you think that what you've simulated actually makes sense and does work for you, then you click submit, and then actually that's it. So the HR will be informed, and then your contract will be changed, basically.
That's so amazing.
Yeah, it just means that you don't need any approval process from, because usually if you were to change your contract from full-time to part-time in normal companies these days, still you would have to go through a lot of approvals, and
it's a big process.
It's a huge process. And this tool really simplified that. And what's really great about it is that, of course, there's all these HR processes and legal contracting and all of that involved in the back end. But it was a clear signal from the company that we completely encourage flexible work and part-time work as well. You will not be disadvantaged if you decide to do part-time or flexible work. This is all part of who we are, and we support people in your individual life stages, in your individual life phase, and that was the other thing that was really interesting, because this is already more than 2 years old, this tool. And in the very beginning, everybody thought that it would be most beneficial for moms, right?
That would be my next question.
Exactly.
Who is doing that?
Exactly. Of course, a lot of moms are taking advantage of it. I also took advantage of it, and that's how I started my part-time process. But what we also saw is that actually it's not only the moms who actually use this program. It's also the young male employee who wants to do an MBA on Fridays, and for that he's reducing his hours. Or it's the older manager, senior manager, whose parents are sick, and therefore, somebody has to take care of these parents more, and so he reduced his hours, etc. So the cases are just endless, and that's what I think that was one of the biggest learnings and really great parts about this tool, that there's actually, if you think about it from a human perspective, there's so many incidents in life and phases in your life where you think, like really being bound to a very unflexible 9 to 5, 40-hour system will not really work for me right now, right? Yes. And also that phase probably doesn't last forever, right? But so when the company sends a clear signal that it's okay, when you want to take that time, for whatever needs that you might have, we'll support that. And that's not going to be that because you do it, you're somebody that's weird, and an exception. Yes. And through that, what's happened is that this whole concept of flexible and part-time work has become so much more normalized within the company. And so it's become completely okay and not weird. Yeah. And I think that's the magic sauce.
I think so too. I think the message is the fantastic thing on that whole idea, what you implemented there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Very cool. So what's the acceptance also in management or let's say leadership levels? Do you also have leaders who are taking advantage of that?
Yes, definitely.
Really? Cool.
We also have managing directors who this is the highest level in Accenture. Who are currently also doing part-time. So that's also a clear example showing that even the highest management positions can be done at a part-time level. It's not a problem at all. Yeah. We also have a lot of shared leadership roles that we're experimenting with and starting to have more and more of. So the two people share one role together, and that's a high-level senior management role, etc.
Yeah, super. Because this is like a very old, let's call it fairy tale, legend, whatever, that many of us still think that leadership only works when you work at least 40 hours a week, and that's not true.
That is not true. That is definitely not true.
No. Yeah, very cool. So, Kaitlyn, you already mentioned that you are a mom of 2 kids, also of a very sweet, very sweet toddler.
Thank you.
And a few months ago, you established a very special hashtag. You called it Mom2. Why did you do that, and what's your message in that?
First of all, disclaimer, Mom2 wasn't planned per se, right? It was actually more an accidental happening. Because I had been invited to talk on stage at Forward Festival, and this was already a year ago. And this was during the time when I was on maternity leave. And I just decided to do that talk, which was anyway about diversity and inclusion in the creative field. How can we get more women? How can we get them to stop leaving the industry? Things like that. And my baby daughter, who's now a sweet toddler, was still a baby back then and was only 6 months old. And I thought, well, maybe I could just, strap her on top of me and do the talk, because the talk is anyway about diversity. And Otma, the founder of Forward Festival, thought that this was such an amazing idea, because actually the festival is about, creative projects and really cool projects that you've done. And I had been saying to him, but I haven't done a really cool project that I can show, because I was on maternity leave. And then says Otma,
that's the huge
but
project.
you made the best project of your life. And I'm like, yeah, that's true.
That's true.
And that's why I said, well, then can I take the baby on stage with me? And he said, yeah, why not? That sounds like a really great idea. Did you schedule it
during her sleeping time, or?
We tried, actually. And I have to also say, she was a really good baby. She was a really well-behaved baby, so that helped a lot. But then, so the point is, so I did that talk, which was received very well, which was great. And I felt a lot of really positive energy in the stage. And then what do you normally do after you give a talk? You post about it on LinkedIn, right? So I did post about it on LinkedIn like you normally do, with a photo that had me with a baby, and on one hand I had this clicker. And that just absurdly started going viral on LinkedIn, right? People started telling me, I think your post is going viral. And I was literally in denial for the first few days. And I said, no, that can't be. I think a lot of people are liking it, but yeah, will someone stop? It didn't stop. And it just kept growing and growing. And people started commenting, liking. And at the end, it reached, I think, almost 6 million views.
Wow.
Which I, previously and also afterwards never ever again reached in my life. So that was a one-time thing for me. But it started gaining traction, and I started getting a lot of messages from women all around the world. So really, at the end, I think I got more than 1,000 messages from so many different countries as well, who all told me, regardless of which country they were in, I have the same problem, and I completely relate with what you wrote about, being not only a professional, but also a mom, and I don't feel like I have to hide it anymore, right? And I think it's unfair that I have to feel like I have to hide being a mom and that part of me to be able to seen as professional, right? And so I started thinking, and I am a communications expert, and I started thinking, well, maybe there's a reason why this resonates so much with so many people, especially all across the world. So I thought, well, then it's probably a good idea to give a name to it, because once something has a name to it, then it gets more talked about, and it gets easier to really expand the discussion, right? And that's why I was thinking, is there something that's related to this? And of course I thought about the Me Too movement, where I was literally trying to pay an homage to Me Too, because I think even before Me Too, even myself, I hadn't realized that how normalized actually it is, how common a problem it is for women to experience sexual abuse, right, or sexual assault. And I had also had sexual harassment experiences in my career, and I just, forgot about it or tried to forget about it, right? But through that movement and just seeing how many people posted Me Too, it gave courage to other women to also talk about their stories. And through that, this whole societal awareness about this problem completely increased, right? And that's why I decided to pay an homage to that and say, hashtag mom too, because, I am a professional, but I'm a mom too. And I think it's time that we need to start talking more about how important it is that we don't feel the need to hide ourselves being moms or parents, for that matter, to be.
I totally agree with that. What do you think? Maybe let's start. What was the motive of hiding it that long? So why did women do that? And why do you think that time is over now?
I think the motive for that goes back to this whole concept of the superwoman complex, right? So we've come a long way, right? Feminists have come a long way, and we have won a lot of things. We have won rights to, for women to vote. We've won rights for women to be able to work. And all of that is great, but because all of that was pretty modern and relatively new, and that's why I think for so many women, or for the society, it was somehow always seen as that, it's an additional role that you've gotten on top of your household chores and household family responsibilities. And well, now that you've gotten it, you've fought so hard to be able to work, so now don't complain about it, right? So that was, I think, sort of the first generation. And then it started going into the direction of, okay, more and more women started working. But then, when you start working, I think the first women who were working maybe worked more in the administrative roles. There were a lot of secretaries, etc. But then that generation ended, and then came the generation where, we were also able to do all the other jobs, what the men were doing and all of that. But that led us to think, that we have to look at the company, at our workspaces, as completely equal as the other men, our male counterparts. And that meant in that generation, very often, that the male counterparts didn't have to worry at all about their household responsibilities.
That was not on their paper.
Exactly. And that's why, to be able to seen as equal to them, women had to pretend as if their household responsibilities didn't exist, because otherwise it would seem like you have to divide your focus, and you're not focused 100% enough on what's really important, your
that's
job.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I think that's what led to this whole superwoman sort of generation, where it felt like the entire generation felt like we're now superwomen, we're really strong, we're strong women who are working. But as a result, we had to sort of put under the carpet everything else that was private, right?
Okay.
Which I think definitely was not healthy at all.
Not at all.
Yeah.
So, and why do you think that's over now? So the newer generation of women, they're obviously different. They feel different about that, and they're not able or not willing to hide that anymore. Why do you think is that?
I think there's a lot of different factors that came into play, which I think ended up as becoming something that's very positive for women. And some of that is, I think, the evolution of social media, where it became possible to see the private lives of other people much more transparently as before. It became also possible to talk about such topics more open. So women started to realize, it's not just me who have this problem, but actually it's a very common problem. So let's talk about this more in detail. COVID and pandemic and the whole quarantine mix of homework and all of that, it was chaotic, but also the benefit that we had from it is that people started to realize that it is possible to mix work and life. It's not such a complete cut thing anymore. It doesn't have to be. People can still perform even if work and life is mixed. So I think all of those factors mixed together to create a sort of an awareness in, I think, the society, and also especially for the younger generations, that it's okay to show your vulnerability. It's okay to show your private life. It's okay to show that you're not always strong, and actually that makes you more human. And I think that societal general awareness is what helped propel this much more.
I liked it very much.
Thank you.
I hope that you're right.
I think I'm right.
You are.
Yeah.
Okay, Kaitlyn, give me an idea. What is going on in, let's say, the consulting industry? Because you're definitely in the creative industry as well, but also embedded in the consulting industry. What's about going on there in terms of equality and inclusion? What's the status quo? What would you say?
I have to say that I think we're living in really interesting times, and really dynamic, changing times, where you can really physically feel the change from 3 years ago to today, right? And I think consulting industry is a really great example of that, because as you say, what I work in is a mix of consulting industry and the communication advertising industry, and both I think especially before the pandemic were the classic examples of zero work-life balance, rather 100% or 1,000% work, and life, what is that? And I also have a lot of anecdotes, really funny anecdotes, funny and sad at the same time, about the time before, just a few years ago actually, where it was just commonly said that if you work in consulting and then and then if you get pregnant, then you can just leave the industry because it just won't work for you anymore. It was very much associated with having to travel all the time, having to work over hours all the time, things like that. If you were to hear some sort of a statement like that today, you would, everybody in the room would flip out immediately, and that person can be, I think, can expect to have a talk with HR exactly in the next hour.
That totally changed.
Right? That totally changed.
That's so interesting.
And actually, I think therefore, what's happened, especially in the consulting industry, is because of the project-based work, it's become. I think the consulting industry was one of the first actually who were anyway doing relatively more remote work than other industries.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and so and that used to be actually more or less not the norm before the pandemic, but because we had anyway been doing that, that's why it was very easy to really change 100% to remote work and hybrid work and flexible work models. And I think that's why the consulting industry is in a really great position right now. And there are a lot of the companies in the consulting industry are more or less, I think, really the pioneers in terms of future of work, flexible work, because they've already had the experiences and they already know what to expect.
And the structures, right?
Exactly. They also have the systems and tools that really make it possible. So,
cool. So you have to rewrite the stories now.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. Kaitlyn, let's talk about Macht. I'm using the German word now, very aware, because if we translate it to English, it's power more or less, and power is more and at the same time less than Macht. You know what I mean? So let's stay with Macht for 1 second.
Yes.
What is your association with Macht? What comes to your mind?
Macht. I'll be really honest here, and I think the first association that I have with the word Macht is rather negative, right? And I've been thinking about this because you asked me this question actually on via email a few days ago, right? And why is that, right? And I think it's actually because I think we have to really try not to confuse fake Macht and wahr, so real power,
Macht,
real Macht. And I think the society, and myself included, have this negative connotation of Macht comes from the so many examples that we see in the world with fake Macht, right?
What do you mean with fake Macht?
Exactly. So I think fake Macht is something that's not substantial.
Okay.
That's oberflächlich, right? Maybe I can give like the counter example. So I thought about what do I think then is the true Macht. And for me, I think that's something that's really very solid, right? Where if your inside is so solid, so that the energy from that inside and that solidness is emanating very naturally to the outside.
Okay.
I think that energy and that sort of charisma is Macht and true Macht.
True Macht.
So something with substance, right?
Okay.
Something that's not just on the surface. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. And the fake Macht on the other side is more or less something pretended.
Exactly. Or something that you abuse because you're insecure about it, because actually you lack the substance.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And I think that's also related with, so I had this really cool session like in a conference about like a month ago. And in that session, it was about finding safe spaces. And can I plug people's names here? Is it allowed?
Definitely, if they are okay with that.
I hope they're okay with it. It was actually led by Maria from Octenticity. I hope I said that right. It's a startup that's focusing on mental health. It's a Viennese startup. Super, really cool work. You should look into it. Maybe also interview her. But it was about safe spaces and finding your own safe space. But the whole question was about, okay, so, well, we're talking about this on a business context, and in teams, how can I then make a safe space for my team? And then actually the answer was really surprisingly simple. And Maria said, well, at the end of the day, you have to, first of all, really find a very solid, safe space for you. Because when that's solid enough, that will, sort of seep out and expand, so that you can only create a safe space for other people around you if you yourself have a safe space inside of you. And that resonated so well with me. And I think that's also very well linked with this whole Macht concept, that it needs to have that solid substance, and then it will automatically sort of emanate outside.
Cool. I like that interpretation. So when we talk about your Macht and your power, when do you feel most empowered?
I feel most empowered so I talk a lot in my job, right? It's part of my job, and I talk with a lot of people. And I think I feel most empowered when I see that to the person that I'm talking to, or to the public audience that I'm talking to, I see brains clicking, right? And I think that's a really great sensation to have when you see that there's going that click in their brains. And then right after that click usually comes this sort of, it feels like a door opening.
An epiphany. Yeah.
Maybe.
Some
or
new,
they're getting some new ideas.
Exactly.
And that
Some
brain door is
brain.
just opening.
Cool.
And when I feel like I have initiated that, I think that's when I feel power.
And what would you say, what are the moments when you feel less empowered?
So exactly the moments when I feel like I can't do that, because the person who's sitting across of me has somehow, for some reason, made a block in their brains, and they're not willing to listen no matter what I'm talking about. And usually that's because of some bias or some stereotype or whatever it is. But when that person just decides to just close that door, brain, and is not willing to let me in, then I feel powerless.
Okay. What would you say? What would be the ingredients for more female empowerment in our whole society? What would we as women need to do for more female empowerment?
So I think it's twofold. So first of all, we talked a lot about imposter syndrome today, right? And also we talked about how it's unfair to put all the burden on their own shoulders, because I think the wrong way to go about it is to say to women who suffer from imposter syndrome and say, just go out and do it. You can do it. Just feel complete and you are enough. That's a good way to do it, but I don't think it's enough. I don't think it's fair to put all the burden on the individuals. So I think to solve that, really one of the best ways, I think, is to have a lot of women role models for women who are going out there and getting their voices heard, so that other women can also see, so that's also possible, and that woman is also talking about her experiences in a vulnerable way. For instance, I can maybe do it too. I think that's really, really important. But more and more, I'm also thinking that actually it's even more important to have more role models for men, and especially for male leaders, male managers, because I think the awareness level for women has become pretty high currently, and we've all become pretty woke, and we all want to become more flexible and be in more touch with ourselves and our build safe spaces for us, all of that, right? And have a better work-life balance, have a better relationship with our career, all of that. But then that is very oftentimes met with hurdles, and that hurdle is, coming from, let's say, a male leader or a male manager, for example, who has, for his entire career, not really been experiencing that. And so even though he doesn't mean bad, still he doesn't really understand that need from a very fundamental level, and is still in that older generation mindset of, being used to the whole superwoman and all of that. And what we see also in Accenture is that we actually have quite a few male role models, and we're trying to build more and more of that. So we're having, for instance, dads who go on paternity leave for more than many, many months or are doing part-time currently. And when we sort of put them on the pedestal and say, look, this is also possible, then it creates actually some sort of like an aha moment, that brain clicking moment for many male colleagues as well, where they see, so that's also possible for me as well. Yeah. And then they also understand from a human level, okay, so that could actually make sense for my life as well. I could maybe try that out as well, right? And then they start to more fundamentally understand when, for instance, a woman colleague comes and says, I have to go pick up my child right now, and so I won't be able to work this time, etc. And that's why I think this whole, we've talked a lot about systems, but even the system, like who builds that system? Sure. The whole team and the whole company is building that system, and the top CEO is deciding to build that system and culture and tools, and that person needs to be able to understand it more on a fundamental level. And for that to happen, we need more human male role models, and we need to talk more about that on a societal level.
Yeah, very good idea. The whole role model thing is, I think the best motto for that is seeing is believing.
Yeah.
Whenever we see it, we can believe it.
Yeah.
Without seeing it, we can many times not even imagine that it's possible. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's so true. Kaitlyn, thank you very much for being here, my guest in Macht Zentrale. Power Central.
Sounds so much cooler.
Do you think so?
No. Macht Zentrale is cool.
Yeah, I think so too. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks so much for being so open and share all the insights with me and with our people who are going to listen to the podcast as well. And have a nice evening.
Thank you. You too.
Ciao.
Ciao.